continue to search for survivors and recover bodies. However, the famed Kruger National Park, which had been forced to close and evacuate guests, will resume operations from today. Zimbabwe authorities have reported 74 deaths and revealed that several schools, roads and bridges have been destroyed. Mozambique says 103 people have been killed, either directly from the floods or indirectly from causes such as electrocution or disease. Media reports say rescue efforts to reach survivors have been slow. 11 people have died in Madagascar. Tens of thousands of people across the region have had to evacuate their homes and seek temporary accommodation elsewhere. Experts put the increased intensity of the rains down to climate change in a region which regularly suffers from lengthy droughts. Iran's president has warned that any attack on Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei will trigger an all-out war against Iran. Masoud Pezeshkian added that Iranians are facing economic hardship due to inhumane sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies. Iran's foreign ministry accused Washington of causing regional tensions and reiterated Tehran's firm resolve to defend its sovereignty. Iran's judiciary says law enforcement and security forces are working to distinguish what it calls misled individuals from organized operatives and terrorist elements. Officials say key organizers, including foreign-linked networks, have been identified and judicial proceedings are underway.
The United States is responsible for the current tensions. Escalation has now become part of the nature of U.S. policy. It is not Iran that deploys its military from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Mexico and the border of the U.S. It is not Iran that interferes in the internal affairs of the United States. It is the United States that, under various pretexts, continues to pursue its interventionist policies toward Iran and other countries in the region. Whenever the U.S. speaks of diplomacy, it in fact means imposing its will and dictating terms.
Relations between the United States and Europe continue to worsen over Greenland. In the latest development, the Financial Times is reporting that the EU is considering its options, which include more than $100 billion worth of tariffs, or even restricting U.S. companies from the bloc's market if U.S. President Donald Trump's duties over Greenland go ahead. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni called Washington's move a mistake.
An increase in tariffs for countries that have chosen to contribute to Greenland's security, in my view, is a mistake, and I do not agree with it. The intention of some European countries to send troops to take part in greater security should have been understood not as an initiative directed against the United States, but rather against other actors.
In a joint statement, the 8 European countries targeted by U.S. tariffs affirmed their support for Denmark and Greenland. William Denslow has more now from Brussels.
In response to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threat, the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said that Europe will not be blackmailed. The US President says he'll impose a 10% duty starting in February that will rise to 25% in June on 8 European nations, unless the US is allowed to purchase the Arctic island of Greenland. The US maintains that it needs the semi-autonomous Danish territory for national security purposes, arguing that fellow NATO allies are too weak to stave off perceived threats. The European nations of the UK, Netherlands, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Germany and France are included in the tariff list. In a joint statement, those European powers said they're ready for dialogue, but warn that tariffs will undermine transatlantic relations. The European Commission President and Council President have shared that sentiment, warning of a downward spiral should duties be imposed.
The European Union will always be very firm in the defence of international law wherever it may be, and of course starting in the territory of the member states of the European Union. Right now I am coordinating a joint response from the member states of the European Union on this issue.
Ambassadors from the EU's 27 member states are convened to discuss this tariff threat and coordinate next steps. Several European political parties have stated they'll block a move to ratify a trade agreement brokered between the EU and the US last summer that would remove tariffs on some American products. But others want to go further. French President Emmanuel Macron is among those calling for the EU to use its so-called trade bazooka in response to these US threats. The anti-coercion retaliatory measure has never been used and would give the bloc the power to impose tariffs of its own and impose export controls, a move that would likely further antagonise the Trump administration. William Denslow, CGTN, Brussels.
In an interview with NBC's Meet the Press, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Europe will come around to the need for the US to control Greenland.
Is Greenland or NATO more essential to the United States' national security?
Well, Chris, that's obviously a false choice. That's a
not from the perspective of European leaders.
The European leaders will come around and they will understand that they need to be under the U.S. security umbrella. What would happen in Ukraine that if the U.S. pulled its support out? The whole thing would collapse. That the U.S., Kristen, to be clear, since 1980, the U.S. has spent U.S. military spending versus NATO military spending. We have spent $22 trillion more dollars than the Europeans have. That we are peace through strength. And the Europeans now are only trying to play catch up. And that is only through President Trump. President Trump believes in NATO, but he does not believe in the American people being dragged in.
Scott Bessent also said Europe's perceived weakness necessitates US control of Greenland for global stability. He said the US will not outsource its national security to other countries. The comments come as Republican lawmakers scramble to contain Trump's threat of taking possession of the autonomous territory. Owen Fairclough reports from Washington.
Greenlanders united over Donald Trump's threats to take their island by force, backed by European troops deployed to the Arctic Circle island. The US president's ambitions have driven transatlantic relations to a new low, with the prospect of some of NATO's founding members fighting each other, their alliance already strained by divisions over Ukraine's future, and now compounded by Trump threatening extra tariffs on 8 European nations who oppose him over Greenland. The most senior Republican in Congress on Sunday tried to dial down the tensions.
I don't foresee military intervention in Greenland.
But ultimately, House Speaker Mike Johnson backs Trump's rationale that the US needs the Danish territory for its minerals and location.
Greenland has strategic importance to us because of its geography, its placement.
And Johnson's tone is different from White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller's, whose comments earlier this month set European alarm bells ringing.
Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland. The United States is using its military to secure our interests unapologetically in our hemisphere.
Opposition Democrats have rallied behind NATO allies, and they were joined on Sunday by the Prime Minister of Canada, who's had to fend off Trump's suggestion the US buy its next-door neighbour.
The future of Greenland, decisions about the future of Greenland, are for Greenland and Denmark to decide.
If the Western order appears to be rapidly changing amid this escalating crisis, Trump will have an opportunity to test global reactions to it when he addresses the World Economic Forum in Switzerland on Wednesday. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
China's economy expanded by 5% in 2025. According to China's National Bureau of Statistics, the country's GDP exceeded 140 trillion yuan. Here's more details now on China's economic performance last year.
初步核算，全年国内生产总值100。
According to preliminary estimates, GDP was 187.9 billion yuan in 2025, an increase of 5.0% over the previous year at constant price. By industries, the value added of the primary industry was 9334.7 billion yuan, up by 3.9% over the previous year. That of the secondary industry was 49965.3 billion yuan, up by 4.5%. And that of the tertiary industry was 887.9 billion yuan, up by 5.4%. By quarters, the GDP for the first quarter went up by 5.4% year-on-year, up by 5.2% for the second quarter, 4.8% for the third quarter, and 4.5% for the fourth quarter. The GDP for the fourth quarter increased by 1.2% quarter-on-quarter.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry has been giving a press briefing in reaction to the economic data.
China Central Asia Economic and Trade Corporation has thrived despite challenges, with the trade volume surpassing the $100 billion mark. This highlights its momentum and the driving role of the China Central Asia Cooperation Mechanism, marking a historic milestone.
And that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from around the continent and Africa Live. I'll see you shortly. Thanks for watching. South Africa and Mozambique bear the brunt of 3 months of heavy rains and flooding as the regional death toll rises above 200. Pro-government forces move into the eastern Congolese city of Uvira after the M23 rebels announced their withdrawal. And the UN human rights chief laments for ordinary Sudanese as he says advanced weapons continue to fuel the conflict. This is Africa Live. A warm welcome to the program. I am Penina Karibe. Also coming up this hour. In business, Libya unlocked $2.7 billion in international investments to upgrade its Misurata free zone. In sports, we'll have all the reaction to last night's chaotic AFCON final as Senegal emerged kings of Africa. We'll begin in southern Africa, where officials continue to warn of more intense rain and flooding over the coming days. It comes as the death toll across the region from this extreme weather has surpassed 200 since late October. Southern Africa's rainy season generally runs from October to April, peaking between November and March. South Africa has declared a national disaster, and Mozambique's President Daniel Chapo has cancelled his trip to this week's World Economic Forum in Davos due to the crisis. CGTN's David Mbithi with the latest.
The scale of the flooding in the southern African nation of Mozambique has affected more than 200,000 people nationwide. On Friday, authorities said at least 103 people had been killed in the heavy rains that began in mid-December, causing widespread flooding in Gaza Maputo and Sofala provinces. The situation has forced Mozambique's President Daniel Chapo to skip the World Economic Forum in Davos this week, saying his focus and priority is to save lives. South Africa also dispatched rescue teams to southern Mozambique on Sunday after a car carrying 5 members of a South African mayoral delegation was swept away by floodwaters in Chokwe, some 200 kilometers north of the capital, Maputo. South Africa, which is also reeling from catastrophic flooding, has declared a national disaster. The deluge has claimed nearly 40 lives in Limpopo and Mpumalanga provinces. Officials say Limpopo was the hardest hit, with more than 1,600 homes and 31 schools affected. The flooding also forced the partial closure of Kruger National Park, one of Africa's largest wildlife reserves, prompting the evacuation of hundreds of tourists and staff members from flooded camps to other parts of the park. Officials said it's set to reopen this week. Flooding has also hit the island nation of Madagascar off the coast of Africa, as well as Malawi and Zambia. Authorities in the region still warn that more severe weather is expected in the coming days. Divin Bidi, CGTN.
Let's bring in Julie Shire joining us live from Cape Town. Julie, the South African government has declared a state of national disaster over the flooding over there. How bad is it and which areas are most affected?
Yeah, Penina, as you mentioned and as we've seen the story before, 37 people have been confirmed dead, and the most affected areas have been Limpopo and Mpumalanga being the hardest hit. Districts including Mopani, Vembe, Waterberg in Limpopo and parts of Mpumalanga has suffered severe floodings. And as we heard, this is an area that has lots of game lodges. So we not only are seeing the problem that has affected the rural areas, but also these are very poor areas and the livelihoods that have been affected to the people who work in these game lodges. Some lodges have been closed, people have been evacuated from them, and homes and roads have been completely washed away. On Thursday, this past Thursday, President Cyril Ramaphosa visited the affected areas in Limpopo, and he described scenes of widespread destruction, including homes that were completely swept away. This has also influenced the beginning of the school year here in South Africa because of the flood-hit areas. So schools were unable to open, and this just highlights the broader social impact of the disaster, Penina.
So, Julie, now that a state of national disaster has been declared, what happens from now on, and how does this enhance mitigation efforts?
So, Penina, it's very important to have that declaration come out that this is now a national disaster. 400 millimeters of rain have fallen in this area. And so this means that in 1 week, that's what happened. And so these communities have been completely affected. And with that being now declared a national disaster, this means that mitigation efforts can start. And this will bring more intervention, fast-tracking funding for this relief operations and for repairs. It also means that the provincial and the local authorities will work together, and that national resources can bring in helicopters to rescue people and to start the recovery of what needs to happen. These are also areas of agriculture and tourism, but most importantly, there needs to be some restoring of calm to the area, and also deal with, for instance, the infrastructure that has been extremely damaged. And what's expected for the next few days is that there will still be lots of rain coming, Penina.
Yeah, and Julie, we know neighboring Mozambique has also been affected by these rains and the flooding. In fact, it seems to be the worst hit so far in the Southern African region. How much can you tell us about the situation there?
Yes, Mozambique certainly being the hardest hit in the Southern Africa so far, with authorities reporting 103 deaths during an unusually severe rainy season this year. The deaths are linked to flooding, lighting, collapsing of infrastructure. But then we have another problem, which will obviously be cholera because of the water contamination. So those areas now completely affected. Mozambique is very much prone to this, unfortunately, for climate shocks. It is cyclone time. So Mozambique very much affected, and we are going to follow that. But many people are worried about the humanitarian impacts that can happen in Mozambique and in neighboring South Africa, because those are very vulnerable populations, Nina.
All right, Julie, just stay with us for a moment for some news breaking out of South Africa, where education authorities say at least 11 school children have been killed in an accident in Gauteng. Julie, do you have more information on this?
Yes, Penina, this, again, absolutely tragic situation unfolding in Valderbilter Park, which is in south of Johannesburg in the Gauteng province. What we know so far is that a minibus taxi serving as a school transport collided with a side tipper truck earlier this morning. And unfortunately, 11 of the children that were on this bus died on the scene. The impact was so severe that the minibus was thrown off the road. So those 11 children died on the scene, but another 5 are in critical state and have been rushed to nearby hospitals for emergency treatment. The scene remains very much an emergency and an investigation scene at the moment. That area has been cornered off to find out what caused this collision. And Gauteng Education MEC Matomi Chiuluani is there and dealing with, obviously, families, trying to understand exactly the extent of this tragic news. At this stage, the department, the spokesperson, has acknowledged what's happened, but they are also going to launch an investigation into what happened. But not only that, Penina, unfortunately, this is not the first time. We seem to have a systemic problem that happens with reckless driving, unworthy vehicles, and frequent accidents. And that's what the Gauteng Department of Education, and also at a national level of education, they will want to find out why, unfortunately, these events happen so often in South Africa, Penina.
It's just a tragic incident, Julie. Thank you for that reporting. Julie Sher, live for us there in Cape Town. Now, in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, the army and its allied militia have retaken Uvira after the reported departure of M23 rebels who had seized the city early last month. Eyewitnesses, including local authorities and a civil society group, said the Wazalendo, a pro-government fighter group, were entering Uvira on Sunday, with Congolese forces expected to follow. Uvira residents have been expressing relief at the development. However, reports indicate that some M23 fighters remain in the city. On Saturday, the M23 announced they were withdrawing from the strategic city in what the militia spokesperson called a difficult decision. He said the withdrawal was to give peace efforts a chance, adding that Uvira would be under the full responsibility of the UN and the international community. However, there has been no comment yet from the UN or the Congolese government. Early last year, the Rwanda-backed M23 took control of large swathes of the eastern DRC, including the cities of Bukavu and Goma, sparking a major escalation in its conflict with the army. Last month, despite continued peace efforts, it also seized Uvira, a town a few hundred kilometers south of Bukavu. Our correspondent Jafar Al-Katanti is in Goma. He joins us live now via Zoom for more. Jafar, reports of M23 leaving Uvira and pro-government forces returning there. How much can you tell us?
Just exactly yesterday, the last talk of M23 soldiers left Uvira, and in the morning, then some Wazalendo.
Okay, we do apologize for that poor quality of audio. We'll try sort that out and reconnect with him in a short while. Let's move on to Togo for now, where African leaders have made a push to bring peace to the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The region has seen an escalation in violence in the past 12 months after the Rwanda-backed M23 rebel group took control of large parts of the territory. A peace deal was agreed between Kinshasa and Kigali last year, but implementation and compliance is a major problem. The summit in Lome was chaired by Togolese President Faure Gnassingbé, who was appointed mediator by the African Union. CGTN's Sharon Baranga has more.
The Togolese capital Lome has become a key diplomatic crossroads. The city is hosting a high-level summit aimed at securing peace in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo and the broader Great Lakes region. The summit's chair, Togolese President Faure Gnassingbé, says all the talking must soon be turned into action.
This high-level meeting comes at a critical moment. We are no longer merely issuing renowned diagnoses. We are no longer just making statements that overlap without always reinforcing each other. The situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Great Lakes region compels us to act with coherence.
The summit's main goal is to drive the concrete implementation of the peace agreement signed between the DRC and Rwanda. This comes at a time of fragile calm on the ground, with African leaders focusing on strengthening diplomatic and security efforts beyond words.
Africa must not fail in its mission of peace. The challenge is first and foremost to establish the conditions for a lasting peace in connection with the ceasefire and enforcement team
affecting neighboring nations and making it a continental issue.
The security situation prevailing in Eastern DRC remains on the African and international agenda, not only due to the worsening of the situation, but also because of its impact on the Great Lakes sub-region.
African leaders gathered in Lome emphasized that peace in the DRC is inseparable from the broader security of the region. Togo says its mediation seeks to build a collective African response based on dialogue, political responsibility, and preventing further escalation. While diplomatic progress has been made, including agreements between the DRC and Rwanda on prisoner exchanges and ceasefire verification, many of these commitments have yet to materialize on the ground. Leaders in Lome are determined to make 2026 the year these agreements come to fruition.
Following diplomatic successes with the signing of agreements in 2025-2026 must be the year of African Union mediation to bring about peace.
The clock is ticking. In Lome, Africa is once again trying to speak with one voice, aiming to end the violence in Eastern DRC and stabilize the entire Great Lakes region. As the summit continues, the world watches to see if this Togolese-led mediation can finally silence the guns and bring peace to a region that has known nothing but conflict for decades. Sharon Baranga, CGTN.
All right, let's reconnect now with Jafar Al-Katanti, who is in Goma and joining us via Zoom from there. Jafar, good to have you back with us. So we're talking about those reports of the M23 leaving Uvira and pro-government forces such as the Wazalendo returning there. How much can you tell us about that?
That's the news since yesterday morning. The day before yesterday, such as Saturday, the last troops of M23 was leaving Uvira because this withdrawal from Uvira started 2 weeks ago, where some soldiers left because of taking care of some communities, according to what locals in Uvira was saying. But from Saturday to yesterday morning, all M23 claimed to be left Uvira. Then some Wazalendo, who are these militia fighting alongside FRDC, regained Uvira applauded by the communities of the city of Uvira. But some communities was forced to leave Uvira, such as Wanyamulenge community, because they are appointed to be backing the M23 as their Tutsi. And this is one of the fact of this war. Some communities are being linked to the conflict because they support, or even they can be pointed without supporting. So now Uvira is under control of Wazalendo, and we are still waiting to see what the international community will decide, if it will be MONUSCO to take the control of the city soon, or if FRDC will return back in the city.
Right. So the last 2 months have seen massive displacement of people due to the conflict in the east. How is the situation now?
The situation is still complicated for these people because, for example, people of Uvira who fled, they went in the direction of Fizi and Baraka zone, where there is no road, there is no accessibility. And as we know, fighting is now in that zone. So people fled fighting in Uvira in a zone where they are now under other fightings. And it's a very sensitive zone because they are in mountains where there is no accessibility to NGOs, to anything. So many people are facing bad situation in their displacement situation. And as we know that some people who fled the returning back of Wazalendo in Uvira fled in mountains and in Sange, which is a city 20 kilometers north of Uvira, under the control of M23. So some people are still recognizing M23 as the one who protects them, the one who brought peace for them. So they had to leave Uvira to stay in Sange, also without any humanitarian assistance.
All right, Jafar, thank you very much for that. Jafar Al-Katanti in Goma for us. Now to Sudan, where the UN Human Rights Chief says a chronicle of cruelty is unfolding in the war-torn country. Volker Turk has just wrapped up a 5-day mission to Sudan, where he visited Port Sudan, Dongola, and the localities of Ad-Daba and Merowe in northern state. These are places where many of Sudan's displaced have been seeking refuge during the ongoing civil war. Turk appealed to the international community and regional actors to help bring the conflict to an end. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more.
Addressing the media in Kenya's capital Nairobi on Sunday after a visit to Sudan, Volker Turk says he bore witness to the brutality Sudanese civilians have suffered for close to 3 years.
One woman saw her husband and only son killed. I met her still bedridden from grief and still carrying the bullet that she took in her shoulder while trying in vain to shield her son.
Turk also raised the alarm over a developing humanitarian catastrophe in the Kordofan region, where the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, and its allies are trying to capture the city of Kadugli from the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF.
There are advances towards SAF-controlled Kadugli by the RSF and SPLM North, and we are seeing continued massive displacement of civilians from the besieged city. All this in the context of extreme food insecurity, with famine conditions confirmed in Kadugli and risk of famine in other areas, including in Dilling.
The human rights chief warns if the city falls, there could be a repeat of the atrocities committed against civilians during the siege and eventual capture of the Darfur city of El Fasher by the RSF.
The warning signs of what was to happen were already clear before El Fasher was captured. So I bring you back to El Fasher because our warning signs were very clear. We issued these warnings multiple times, including in September last year. But yet, these warnings were not heeded, and heinous atrocities were committed. I issue here today the same stark warning for Kaduli.
Turk says sexual violence has been weaponized in the conflict, accusing both sides of grave human rights violations. He says his office is documenting the horrific violations and abuses to hold those responsible accountable. Fighting between the RSF and SAF has been raging since April 2023. Tens of thousands have been killed, with close to 12 million people displaced by the fighting. Bobat Nagela, CGTN.
In Libya, at least 200 migrants have been freed from a secret prison in the southeastern town of Kufra. This follows an operation by Libyan security operatives who raided detention cells nearly 3 meters deep. Security sources say the migrants are mainly women and children from Somalia and Eritrea. They had been held captive in the underground prison controlled by a Libyan human trafficker for 2 years. Libya is a notorious transit route for migrants fleeing conflict and poverty, aiming for Europe. As they journey through the North African country, many are targeted and exploited by criminal gangs. It comes a week after about 21 bodies were found in a mass grave in eastern Libya, where 10 survivors bore signs of torture. This is Africa Live. Coming up in business news. Libya unlocks $2.7 billion in international investments to upgrade its Misrata free zone. And the International Monetary Fund backs Ethiopia's economic reforms with a disbursement of around $260 million in fresh funding. Libya's central bank has announced an adjustment to the exchange rate of the US dollar, reducing the dinar's value by 14.7%. It has set the exchange rate at approximately 6.38 to the US dollar. It's the currency's second devaluation within a year, following a 13.3% devaluation in April 2025. The bank attributed its latest decision to the country's persistent political divisions. It also blamed a decrease in oil revenues amid lower global prices and various economic challenges. These include the lack of a unified general state budget and rising public spending. Since the NATO-backed uprising in 2011, Libya has struggled to stabilize its economy and maintain consistent revenue flows. And staying in Libya, the country has partnered with international firms to expand and develop the country's critical maritime gateway, the Misrata Free Zone. According to the country's Prime Minister, the project is expected to draw nearly $2.7 billion in investment. Abdul Hamid Dibeiba says the expanded zone could generate operating revenues of around $500 million annually. The Misrata Free Zone signed the deal with Terminal Investment Limited, which is expected to help turn the port into a competitive logistics hub linking Africa, Europe and the Middle East. Doha-based Maha Capital Partners also joined the partnership, providing long-term capital and strategic oversight. On to Nigeria now. The country's national budget is usually based around crude oil, specifically crude oil production and pricing. For this year, the government is projecting prices of around $64 per barrel and production of 1.84 million barrels per day. While there is no certainty that it can meet the production benchmark, what's more worrisome for the government is global oil price. Analysts say prices could be impacted by a supply glut, especially as the U.S. eases restrictions on the sale of Venezuelan oil. CGTN's Deji Bademosi has more on the story.
When global oil prices fall, Nigeria catches cold as its budget takes a direct hit. Despite the geopolitical tensions in Venezuela, Iran and the Black Sea, which have sent prices up, there are still concerns of a looming supply glut when the tensions die down and Venezuelan oil especially hits the market. Already demand is weak and the market is contending with an ongoing supply surplus of 2.3 million barrels per day. Goldman Sachs is already forecasting Brent and WTI could average $56 and $52 per barrel, way below Nigeria's budget benchmark of $60.
So the fact that we are seeing slowdown in economic activity in major
consumer nations will mean that demand for input material will continue to moderate. And that's why, as long as even OPEC members continue, and OPEC and other members continue to even supply their current level of production, we are going to have possibly an imbalance between demand and supply, because ordinary demand has slowed down. Not because of Venezuela. I think the level of investment that is required to bring Venezuela oil back into the market at a higher volume will not be something that we accomplish in the next 1 year. So I don't think the challenge we're going to have with oil prices will come from Venezuela. It come from the U.S. trade policies that have constrained demand exports by most countries and slow down economic productive activities in almost all the major economies of the world.
Nigeria's challenge is not just price, but also volume. The country barely meets its OPEC production quota, and producing above 1.5 million barrels per day on a consistent and sustained basis has always been a tough struggle. And in the likely event of fresh OPEC production cuts, the country's budget will suffer further. The government, though, says it is ramping up production after curtailing oil theft in the country's oil-bearing region. It says it hopes to hit 2 million barrels per day by 2027.
When we say increasing production, it sounds simple, but there's a lot that goes into it. It means attracting the right investment to increase production, whether it's oil or gas. We're hoping to, achieve at least 1.8 million barrels, per day in terms of oil production, as well as further increase in terms of gas production as well.
But not many are optimistic about the government projection on production.
Increasing our crude oil production by over 200 to 300,000 barrels in a single year average will be a tall call. So we may also struggle to achieve the budget for crude, which also takes you to another issue of negative volume variance. If you add these two variants, negative variances, you're going to have a major decline or a major shortfall in government revenue, which similar to what we saw last year. So if that repeats this year, the government will struggle to meet its budgetary obligations, and that will constrain economic growth.
Despite oil accounting for under 5% of Nigeria's GDP, it still accounts for over 80% of the country's foreign exchange earnings. Any drop in oil revenue will directly impact the local currency and drive up foreign exchange, which has dire consequences in a country that is heavily import dependent.
So we need to diversify and begin to produce some additional goods that have value addition. We've seen some marginal improvement in export of agricultural produce. But we need to get to the point of beneficiation where we export finished goods. And that's the way out of the current quagmire where Nigeria relies almost 80% to 90% on oil exports.
Nigeria's oil problem is no longer just about barrels of oil in the ground, but about a global market it does not control. As the 2026 budget takes shape, analysts say the real test for policymakers will be whether the cycle of vulnerability finally forces deeper economic reform or simply another round of fiscal adjustments. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
In Ethiopia, the International Monetary Fund has approved a fresh disbursement of about $261 million to Africa's second most populous country. It comes after the IMF completed its fourth review of Ethiopia's program under the Extended Credit Facility. The funds will support Ethiopia's homegrown economic reform program, which aims to correct macroeconomic imbalances and lay the groundwork for growth led by the private sector. According to the IMF, Ethiopia's overall program performance has been strong. It said nearly all key targets largely met commitments, even as social safety net spending fell somewhat short of goals. According to the IMF, Ethiopia recorded economic growth estimated at 9.2% in the fiscal year 2024-2025. China's GDP grew 5% last year, exceeding 140 trillion yuan and meeting the annual growth target. The State Council Information Office made the announcement as it outlined China's 2025 economic performance and its outlook for the year ahead. CGTN's Wang Mengjie reports from Beijing.
Despite external shocks and domestic challenges, China's gross domestic product, or GDP, surpassed 140 trillion yuan, or about $20 trillion in 2025, marking a 5% increase year-on-year. So what are the facts behind these figures? Kang Yi, head of China's National Bureau of Statistics, explained why the data pointed to the resilience of Chinese economy.
China's GDP exceeded 140 trillion yuan for the first time in 2025, while foreign exchange reserves topped $3.3 trillion. For a super-large economy like China, achieving such stable development is by no means easy.
Facing mounting uncertainties, Kang said China remains committed to a path of high-quality development, accelerating the shift from old to new growth drivers, while deepening reform and opening up. New growth drivers have continued to strengthen. The World Intellectual Property Organization ranked China 10th among the world's most innovative economies, up one place from the previous year. Amid intertwined risks and challenges, Kang said China's economy has achieved both a leap in quantity and improvement in quality.
This fully demonstrates the Chinese economy's ability to adapt and break through unstable and uncertain environments, as well as its resilience in withstanding pressure and stress.
China's growth rate now ranks among the high list of major economies, making it one of the most stable and reliable drivers of global economic growth. Its contribution to global growth is expected to reach around 30%. Despite the challenges ahead, Kang said China remains confident in its ability to sustain high-quality economic growth, bringing new opportunities and positive momentum to the global economy as it works toward a strong start to the next 5-year plan period. Wang Mengjie, CGTN, Beijing.
We'll begin with last night's Africa Cup of Nations final, as Senegal came through after extra time to defeat the host nation Morocco. But that only tells half the story in what was an epic night in Rabat. CGTN Sadiq Shaban brings us the whole story from the Moroccan capital.
It was the much anticipated matchup of this year's tournament. Two of Africa's top teams going head-to-head in the grand finale of this year's Africa Cup of Nations. 66,000 fans thronged the Moulay Abdallah Stadium here in Rabat to watch the action, while million others followed the match live on television for a match that would make headlines for all the wrong reasons. Each side had clear and decent chances in the first half, but neither could find the back of the net as they went in for the break at 0-0. However, drama unfolded in the second half when Morocco awarded a controversial penalty at the end of the final seconds of the 8 minutes added on after the 90. Senegal fans protested and rioted inside the stadium, having seen their side denied a goal minutes earlier after a VAR review and their players temporarily walked out of the pitch. Morocco's Brahim Diaz missed the resultant penalty kick after 24 minutes delay, calming down the agitated Senegalese supporters as home fans sank. The winning goal was scored just 4 minutes into extra time by Senegal's Pape Gaye, who gave Yassine Bono in the Moroccan goal no chance with a shot from the range.
Honestly, I think it would have been really sad and unfortunate to see a final end like that. Personally, I think it's impossible to convey such an image to the whole world. You know, African football is followed now more than ever. African football has developed in an incredible way. So for me, it was about honor. I'd rather lose than end a match like that, and I think that's what pushed me to tell the lads to come back out onto the pitch and play our football. God is great. All that he does is great.
On était à une minute, même pas d'être champion d'Afrique.
We were last a minute away from becoming African champions. Football is often cruel. Today, we can see that we lost this match and visit our chance to be African champions. Then, we also lost Igamane during the game, so we ended up with 10 men. From the moment we missed the penalty, everything turned against us. In the end, we missed the opportunity of lifetime for some of us. And for me, we have to come back stronger. We cannot give up. We have shown good image of Moroccan football.
Pratiquement en possession, nombre de tirs.
After the match, Morocco fans were less than impressed with how the final descended into a farce as Senegal supporters celebrated their stunning victory.
He ruined it at the minute 98, but all the match was good. The referee was good all the match, but the minute 98 wasn't good.
I'm disappointed and yeah, congratulations Senegal. You are the champion. You deserve the win.
I think it is easy to reach the final at home. He have to win the cup, and he said that he will quit if he don't win the cup. He said already the past African Nationship, and I hope he will leave and will make place for another coach, that we go to the World Cup and to see what it is possible there.
I am champion, I am second étoile, and I'm very happy. I'm from to French. I go to Morocco for this time.
Only for one day?
Only for one day, just for see the match of football, and I'm very happy.
Despite the chaotic ending to an otherwise well-organized Africa Cup of Nations, Senegal would not be denied their second title in 5 years, while Morocco's long wait to lift the AFCON trophy has been extended for another agonizing 2 years. Sadiq Shaban, CGTN, in Rabat, Morocco.
Not surprisingly, there were wild scenes of celebration in Senegal's capital, Dakar. Fans emerged from their homes and other viewing areas to take over the city streets in song and dance. Many said the win was all the sweeter following what they believed to be hugely contentious officiating decisions against their team. It's Senegal's second AFCON title ever, the first coming in 2021.
We really needed to win. This team showed me courage and seriousness. We gave everything we had. We really thank Sadio Mane. He gave us everything.
There was too much cheating, but when Sadio Mane did not accept that our players leave the competition, that really helped Senegal. We would have had problems if we had left, but really Sadio Mane did everything for us to stay. We endured and God rewarded us. We are very happy.
Meanwhile, the Confederation of African Football is coming in for more criticism over its decision to overhaul Africa's football cycle. From 2028, AFCON will be played every 4 years instead of the traditional 2, with other elements of African football being strengthened. However, some members are saying the top brass made the decision without a full and thorough consultation. A CAF spokesman said the decision to overhaul the cycle was ultimately a commercial decision.
My heart says 2 years, but my head knows that 2 years is not sustainable. So my head tells me 4 years is the only sustainable model for African football. African football has to evolve to be commercially strong, to be commercially amongst the best in the world. We have to take a lot of practical steps. How do we attract sponsors? How can we give sponsors longer period to leverage on this? We cannot live on credit card forever. We've got to find ways and means to reposition our brand, to reposition our product, to ensure that commercially it's strong, commercially it's sustainable, commercially it's attractive. That is what you need to do. You mustn't say dead. The competition came in the place of something else. We have to evolve our competitions all the time. Because with CHAN, you could only play, even domestically, some of the leagues were not releasing players. The African Nations League, the CAF African Nations League, is going to obviously play a different role in how it includes zonal participation and ensures that the best players are playing and available during all the windows. No one knows who's going to win this AFCON. I guarantee you, nobody knows. All the 4 teams that are in the semi-finals, all the 8 teams that are in the quarterfinals, all the 16 teams that are in the last 16s, any of them were capable of doing it. It's not a rhetoric what I'm saying. It's not a PR or a sales pitch. It's an objective reality of African football today.
The Winter Games are now only 17 days away, and the Olympic flame continues its journey across the host country, Italy. On day 42, it crossed Lake Garda in the Southern Alps and passed several landmarks, including the International Museum of the Red Cross. It finished the trip in Verona, the city which will host the closing ceremony, and as the opening ceremony of the Paralympics. The flame will head to Mantua today. It's scheduled to arrive in Milan for the opening ceremony on February 6th. Let's turn to Australian Open tennis, which opened on Sunday in Melbourne. And Carlos Alcaraz is safely into the second round, beating home hopeful Adam Walton in straight sets. The world number one asserted early control from the baseline, using power and sharp angles to dictate play. He made an important breakthrough in the 8th game of the first set and went on to close it out 6-3. Walton raced into an early lead in the second, but the Spaniard, fresh after his winter break, fought back to take it in a tiebreaker. The 22-year-old then eased to a 6-2 win in the third set. Alcaraz has 6 major titles but needs the Australian Open to claim the Grand Slam and put him among the sport's greats. He's never been beyond the quarterfinals in Melbourne. The women's top seed also had very few first-round problems. Aryna Sabalenka took out the French wildcard, Tiansoa Rakotomanga, in straight sets. The Belarusian, who's gunning for her third Australian Open championship, took the first set 6-4. The second set was a much more comfortable 6-1. Sabalenka is hot favorite to regain the title she lost last year to Madison Keys of the United States. The 27-year-old won a warm-up event in Brisbane earlier this month. And that's how we leave it for this edition of Africa Live. We invite your feedback, send it to the contacts on the screen, and follow us on our digital media platforms. I'm Penina Karibe. Thanks for watching.